This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax, for a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
This episode is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' The Amateur. When his wife is murdered, Charlie Heller, the CIA's most brilliant computer analyst, must trek across the globe and use his only weapon, his intelligence, to hunt down her killers and enact revenge. Starring Academy Award winner Rami Malek and Academy Award nominee Lawrence Fishburne. The Amateur. Rated PG-13. Only in theaters April 11th.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. Anne of Denmark and her daughter, Elizabeth Stuart, were 2 remarkable women whose lives were shaped by power, ambition, and exile. As the wife of James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, Anne was a patron of the arts and an independent political figure, though her influence at court was often challenged. Her daughter, Elizabeth, inherited her mother's charm and intelligence, becoming a celebrated princess before her fateful marriage to Frederick V of the Palatinate led her to her brief reign as the Winter Queen of Bohemia. Forced into exile after her husband's defeat, Elizabeth spent decades fighting for her family's cause, ultimately securing a lasting legacy through her descendants, who would go on to shape the future of the British monarchy. Born on the 12th of December, 1574, at Skanderborg Castle, Anne of Denmark was destined for a life steeped in power, politics, and culture. As the second daughter of King Frederick II and Queen Sophia, she grew up surrounded by the grandeur of the Danish court, an environment that fostered her lifelong appreciation for the arts. With 5 siblings, including her younger brother, the future King Christian IV, Anne's royal lineage connected her to the ruling houses of Northern Europe, as her sisters would go on to marry influential monarchs across the continent. Her early years were shaped by the guidance of her grandparents, who ensured she received a well-rounded education. Anne developed a refined italic handwriting in both Danish and German before expanding her linguistic skills to include French, Scots, and English, an education befitting a future queen. Under the tutelage of an Italian scholar, she was further exposed to the intellectual and artistic currents of Renaissance Europe. Anne entered into a union with James VI of Scotland in 1589, a marriage that would place her at the heart of the turbulent British courts. Raised in the Lutheran faith, her light-hearted and extravagant nature quickly set her at odds with James's stern Protestant subjects, who viewed her with suspicion. Yet it was not only the people who distanced themselves from her. James himself created a rift between them when he placed the upbringing of their firstborn son, Prince Henry, in the hands of John Erskine, 2nd Earl of Mar, effectively stripping Anne of her maternal influence. Following the death of Elizabeth I in 1603, James ascended the English throne as King James I. Their marriage found a rhythm of coexistence, though they maintained separate quarters in the later years of her life and carved out a distinct role for herself, immersing the court in extravagant entertainments. Their coronation was delayed due to the plague, but when it did take place, it was noted that Anne refused to accept the Anglican communion, hinting at her likely conversion to Catholicism, a move James seemed to tolerate at first. Her conversion to Roman Catholicism became a source of embarrassment for the king, adding another layer of tension to their relationship. Yet her legacy endured through her children, most notably their second son, who would one day take the throne as King Charles I, a ruler whose fate would reshape the monarchy itself. Once in England, Anne immersed herself in cultural patronage, amassing an impressive art collection and supporting figures like architect Inigo Jones, who designed the Queen's House at Greenwich for her. She established Denmark House as her residence and influenced court fashion, maintaining styles long after they had faded elsewhere. Anne was a significant patron of the arts, commissioning numerous paintings and collecting books, earning her a reputation as England's first great royal patroness. Her patronage of the arts, particularly the elaborate masks that dazzled and enchanted audiences, left a lasting imprint on British culture. Masking was an underdeveloped theatrical form, but Anne's influence, drawing on European traditions, elevated it to new heights. Lavish performances such as The Mask of Blackness and Vision of the 12 Goddesses sparked controversy for their daring costumes, but were also widely praised for their spectacle. Contemporary observers, including the Venetian ambassador, commended Anne's artistic vision, recognizing her as the driving force behind these productions. Her patronage not only refined English court culture, but also showcased the monarchy's sophistication to foreign audiences. Beyond the arts, Anne was politically engaged, though early historians often underestimate her influence. She advocated for figures like Sir Walter Raleigh and Lady Anne Clifford, and played an active role in state affairs. In 1617, when James traveled to Scotland, she was appointed to the Council of Regency, temporarily shifting England's political center to her palace at Greenwich. Anne also wielded her influence through strategic alliances, favoring certain ambassadors and negotiating advantageous marriages for her children. Anne of Denmark's first child, Prince Henry Frederick, was born in 1594. Although his birth was celebrated, Anne was devastated when he was taken from her and sent to Stirling Castle to be raised by the Earl of Mar, following Scottish tradition. This separation deeply strained her relationship with James, and their marriage never fully recovered. Anne and James had 6 more children, though only 2, Charles and Elizabeth, survived to adulthood. Prince Henry, once the heir to the throne, tragically died of suspected typhoid fever in 1612, just before his 19th birthday. His death shifted the line of succession to Charles, who would later become King Charles I. His wife, Henrietta Maria, played a key role in completing the Queen's House, one of Anne's architectural legacies. Anne's daughter Elizabeth married Frederick V, Elector Palatine, in 1619 and became known as Elizabeth Stuart of Bohemia, or the Winter Queen. After Frederick's death in 1632, she lived in exile in The Hague for 30 years. Anne of Denmark became a vocal opponent of James's favorite Robert Carr, Earl of Somerset, and his alignment with the Howard faction. Anne played a crucial role in his downfall, helping to orchestrate his replacement with George Villiers. She also convinced James to imprison Thomas Overbury, a key ally of Carr, for his perceived arrogance. Anne suffered from poor health in her later years, following the birth of her last child. She believed to experience gynecological issues, along with an ulcerated leg and gout. Despite seeking treatment at the spas in Bath and Greenwich, Anne's health continued to decline. By 1618, she was too ill to leave Hampton Court Palace and would remain there until her death. Anne of Denmark died on the 2nd of March, 1619, and was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. Though she lacked formal political power as queen consort, she left a lasting impact on the cultural and political landscape of early modern England through her patronage of the arts and strategic court influence. Her daughter Elizabeth Stuart, born on the 19th of August, 1596, embodied much of her mother's strength and charisma. As the second child of King James I, or Sixth of Scotland, and Queen Anne, Elizabeth was the only daughter to survive infancy. Raised at Linlithgow Palace, she enjoyed a privileged upbringing, with dynastic hopes resting on her and her elder brother, Henry Frederick, as her younger brother Charles was considered frail. Anne's legacy lived on in Elizabeth, whose life would be marked by grandeur, political ambition, and the struggles of exile, ultimately securing her place in history as the Winter Queen. When her father became King of England, Elizabeth was placed in the care of Lord and Lady Harrington and moved to Combe Abbey in Warwickshire. Lord Harrington nurtured her love for nature, building small architectural structures to house paintings and stuffed animals, as well as an aviary and miniature menagerie. Over time, she expanded her collection to include meadows with small breeds of cattle from Jersey, Shetland, and the Isle of Man. James instructed that Elizabeth's education should differ from that of her Tudor predecessors and brothers. Unlike them, she was not required to spend her mornings studying Greek and Latin. Instead, her education focused on religion and general history. However, Elizabeth later ensured that her own daughters received a classical education. She also sought to overcome her own educational limitations by offering to help her brother Henry with his Italian lessons in exchange for Latin instruction. Elizabeth idolized her older brother Henry, and their bond was one of mutual affection and shared joy, a stark contrast to the relationship she had with Charles. She and Henry shared an appreciation for the pleasures of life. The letters Elizabeth sent to Henry reflected a deep and enduring love, filled with both affection and respect. Henry's illness had always been a source of concern for Elizabeth, but nothing could prepare her for the devastation of his death in November 1612, just days before her betrothal celebrations. Elizabeth's silence in her letters from 1612 and 1613 following his death speaks volumes of her grief, a grief so profound that she could not bring herself to mention it. Yet her strength of character was evident in the actions she took during his final days. In an attempt to see her brother one last time, Elizabeth disguised herself as a country girl and tried repeatedly to gain access to Henry's isolated sick room. On each attempt, she was recognized and turned away. Unable to reach her brother she loved so dearly. His final words, spoken as he lay on his deathbed, were her name, an indication of the unbreakable bond between them. Elizabeth's sorrow was immeasurable, but in the aftermath, she would carry on his memory, honoring the connection that they had shared and the untimely loss of a brother who had been both her companion and confidant. Her father faced a broader set of responsibilities, and his relations with Europe became increasingly important. Aware of the political tensions left by Elizabeth I's long reign, he aimed to establish himself as a peacemaker amid the ongoing conflicts across Europe. However, this was a difficult task, as one of his primary goals was to reach a peaceful understanding with England's long-standing Catholic enemy, Spain, while also positioning himself as a leader of Protestant Europe. Balancing these two roles proved to be a challenge, but James saw the strategic marriages of his children as a possible solution to achieve these goals. Initially, James considered Catholic matches for both his son Henry and daughter Elizabeth, and as early as 1603, he thought the future Louis XIII of France might be a suitable suitor for Elizabeth. However, by the time Elizabeth turned 12, her political value had grown significantly, leading to even more ambitious marriage proposals. King Philip III of Spain, a member of the influential Habsburg family, put himself forward as an eligible suitor for her. While Queen Anne, Elizabeth's mother, was eager for such a match, seeing the potential for a Spanish alliance, James had other plans. He was determined to marry Elizabeth to a Protestant, and his focus shifted to Frederick V, the Prince Palatine of the Rhine in the Holy Roman Empire, also known as the Palsgrave. Elizabeth was fortunate in this arrangement. Frederick, who was her age, handsome, athletic, and known for his charm and generosity, was a great match. His personality reminded Elizabeth of her beloved older brother, Henry, with whom Frederick had developed a close friendship. It wasn't long before Frederick fell deeply in love with Elizabeth. Though Elizabeth was initially more reserved, she soon grew to appreciate his qualities and the deep connection they shared. Their marriage not only held political promise, but also blossomed into a union based on mutual affection and respect. On Valentine's Day, 1613, a grand wedding ceremony unfolded in the Royal Chapel at Whitehall Palace in London. The 16-year-old bride Elizabeth dazzled in a shimmering silver gown, edged with luxurious taffeta. Her sleeves were intricately embroidered with diamonds of significant value, sparkling brilliantly as they caught the light. She wore a crown adorned with diamonds and other precious jewels, so densely arranged that they appeared like radiant peaks atop her amber-hued hair. The 16 noble bridesmaids, all dressed in white satin and covered in jewels, created a spectacle that made the bride's procession resemble a Milky Way. The 16-year-old groom, equally handsome, was dressed in white satin, embellished with pearls that symbolized purity and innocence. The pearls also symbolized a deep spiritual connection, highlighting the cosmic unity between the two young lovers. The Archbishop of Canterbury officiated the ceremony, with the groom, a German speaker, delivering his vows in English. This underscored the growing influence of the Church of England across Europe. Though the bride struggled to stifle her giggles during her vows, her playful demeanor only endeared her to those present, including her family and guests. The evening festivities included a masque by Thomas Campion, staged by Inigo Jones. Although some found the performance long and tedious, its grandeur was still notable. Following their wedding, the newlyweds spent nearly 2 months being celebrated in London before departing for their new home in Heidelberg, Germany. Their journey took them through Greenwich, Rochester, and Canterbury, and on the 25th of April, 1613, they sailed from Margate to Flushing in Holland, aboard the Prince Royal, beginning their new life together. Elizabeth and Frederick eventually arrived in the Palatinate. Settling in Heidelberg, the capital situated on the banks of the river Neckar, Elizabeth, accustomed to the grand lifestyle of her childhood, continued to demand high standards of entertainment. She hired Inigo Jones, who traveled with the couple to their new home in the Lower Palatinate to create an indoor theater for their enjoyment. In 1619, just 6 years after their arrival, Frederick and Elizabeth were crowned King and Queen of Bohemia. They were invited to take the throne by the Bohemian Confederacy, who wanted to prevent a Catholic ruler from claiming it. However, their reign was brief. Just over a year later, they were defeated at the Battle of the White Mountain. This loss forced them to flee from their court in Prague and resulted in the confiscation of all of their lands in the Palatinate by Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. These events marked the beginning of the 30 Years' War, one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in history. During the time when Frederick was away on military campaigns, the couple exchanged letters with remarkable frequency, sometimes writing to each other 3 or 4 times a week, even twice in a single day. Frederick often referred to Elizabeth as his only heart, expressing his deep affection with words such as, "I kiss her mouth 1,000,000 times in imagination." In 1632, Frederick died suddenly from the plague at Mainz, while continuing his military efforts. Elizabeth mourned deeply, keeping her rooms draped in black for the rest of her life. Special days were set aside for fasting in his memory. Reflecting on their love, she wrote, "Though I make a good show in company, yet I can never have any more contentment in this world. For God knows I had none but that which I took in his company, and he did the same in mine." After Frederick's death, Elizabeth spent the next 30 years in voluntary exile in the Dutch Republic. She returned to England in 1661, a year before her death, shortly after the restoration of her nephew, Charles II. Throughout the 30 Years' War, Elizabeth played a pivotal role in supporting the Protestant cause across Europe. Her beauty, high spirits, and fluency in multiple languages won her admiration from poets, courtiers, and statesmen alike. Her unwavering loyalty to her husband and the people cemented her status as the Queen of Hearts, beloved by all who knew her. 40 years after her passing, the Act of Settlement of 1701 declared her youngest daughter, the Electress Sophia of Hanover, as the closest Protestant heir to the English throne. Her grandson, Prince George of Hanover, would ascend to the throne in 1714 after the death of Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, watch it now on Prime Video.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Anne of Denmark and Elizabeth Stuart lived their lives marked by grandeur, struggle, and resilience. Anne's patronage of the arts and her assertive presence at court shaped the cultural landscape of the Stuart era, while Elizabeth's unwavering determination in exile ensured her family's survival and eventual restoration. Though both women faced political upheaval and personal loss, their legacies endured. Anne through her influence on the early Stuart court, and Elizabeth through her descendants who would ultimately ascend the British throne. Their stories serve as a testament to the strength, ambition, and enduring influence of royal women in a time dominated by men. And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast